Olympic weightlifting coach course, programming for weightlifting module. So the objectives of this module are to review and discuss the optimal training parameters for weightlifting, to review application of weightlifting into current programs, and give examples of weightlifting. So if you're looking at programming for learners, we'll have a quick look at the snatch as an example and how you could integrate snatch specific exercises within a learner's current weekly program. So for example, this is just an example. You might have a learner that's already doing a more of a split program. This might be based upon movement patterns. So for example, they might be doing 4 sessions where we've got a squat dominant, lift dominant, press and pull dominant sessions. And you could quite easily kind of start to integrate some of the more weightlifting specific exercises into those. So maybe within the kind of warm-up or towards the latter stages of the warm-up, then we could go through the overhead squat. So you might want to try to attempt to include about 50 repetitions of the overhead squat within the squat session, and then they can move on to what they would normally cover within their squat program, which may be barbell squats, split squats, leg extension, leg press, etc. But we're trying to get those 50 repetitions. It doesn't necessarily need to be done at a really high load, even just with a kind of an unweighted bar. But what we're trying to do is kind of lay down these motor engrams, and as we kind of know, try to cover our 300 to 500 reps of each so they start to become more autonomous. If you do that within the squat session, the lift session may include something like a snatch grip deadlift, or adapted Romanian deadlift with a snatch grip. For the press session, we may include a snatch grip behind the neck press, and the pull session may start off with a snatch grip, shrug and calf raise as an example. So this wouldn't really kind of veer them away from what they currently do, but it just allows us to start to get them used to some of these kind of weightlifting exercises. Obviously, where appropriate, these will be done with a hook grip as well, so we can start to acclimatise the user to that grip. Over the course of then 6 to 10 weeks, assuming we're kind of doing one of those sessions each per week, this would equate to the 300 to 500 reps of each that we need, as we said, for those to become more autonomous. Alternatively, you could also perform it as a standalone session. So we might do like a preparation session for weightlifting. So we may well include just the same exercises, an adapted Romanian deadlift with a snatch grip, the snatch grip shrug and calf raise, overhead squat, snatch grip behind the neck press, or snatch grip deadlift. And obviously these are all very specific to the snatch. You could start to integrate some jerk, some clean variations, following the same kind of lines. And again, we may just do that one session per week. 6 to 10 weeks, assuming we're just doing it once a week, again would equate to our 300 to 500. Now if we keep with that kind of single session, obviously you can apply the same thing if we were just doing a little bit of practice at the beginning of a squat or lift session, but if we're keeping it as a separate session, again, preparation for weightlifting, we could then progress that to the adapted Romanian deadlift and then into the shrug and calf raise. We could do a behind the neck or progress the overhead squat and integrate that with the behind the neck press. We could then start to include a snatch grip first pull deadlift, some overhead shrugs. Overhead shrugs and glute ham raise, you can kind of see we're doing at a slightly lower rep range. Particularly with the shrugs, you've already done shrugging in the first exercise. You wouldn't really want to overload that, otherwise you're going to get massive DOMs in their upper traps. The glute ham raise, although not a specific weightlifting exercise, it's good to strengthen the posterior chain, the hamstrings and the low back, so that should give us a nice carryover. Again, 6 to 10 weeks, one session a week of that would equate to our 300 to 500 reps. Then we could progress it on to the snatch balance. Again, if we're doing 50 reps of that, you really don't want to be going hell for leather on the load. So even just with the bar, we could usually then do more repetitions per set, because you're not going to get a huge amount of fatigue with just an empty bar. We could also then be doing the snatch power shrug from the high hang, maybe a snatch grip first pull deadlift, but adding in the double knee bend at the end of that. And then again, maybe some back squats, again to help as an assistant strengthening exercise. So what we're looking at doing here is not necessarily getting a massive overload. What we're trying to do is really achieve the volume of the repetitions in order to really groove these motor engrams, and that's really the goal with these types of sessions. That then again could be progressed to doing the drop snatch balance, so focusing on more speed. We can then progress the power shrugs to high pulls from that high hang position. We may have progressed the previous exercise now to actually kind of doing the full power shrug from the floor. So the first pull, double knee bend, the transition phase, and then up into a power shrug. So you're starting to kind of do more ground up or bottom up approach with that exercise. You may also want to do some good mornings for variation, again, just to continue to strengthen that low back. And then that would kind of progress nicely into more of a kind of beginner weightlifting program. So we might do these kind of 3-rep complexes, focusing on the power snatch from the high hang. So we would do all from the high hang, as we mentioned before, our power shrug, high pull, and then into the power snatch. And again, it's repetitions. You don't just have to do those 3 reps per set, and then you may do that 2 or even 3 times for each set because you're still doing it with a light load or lighter load. You could also be doing the snatch high pulls from the floor, and you may also again want to complement that with something like kettlebell swings and even weighted back extensions. Again, maybe kind of lower repetitions on some of those exercises, just again for more posterior chain strengthening, low back strengthening, etc. Kettlebell swings we've got as 50 reps. Not so much we really want to groove that exercise, but more so that if you only do 20 reps and you can kind of get that done within a single set. So probably need a little bit more than we would do with the weighted back extensions. If we focus on the movements then, so the snatch, clean and jerk as well as assistant weightlifting exercises can all still fit into our functional methodology of training, which we covered in the previous module. And with this methodology, a trainer should look to cover all of the key human movement patterns within the program. This does not mean you have to include all the movements or variations of movements within each session, but you should look to try to include that over the entire program, which is usually over the course of a week for most individuals. There will probably also be variations over different phases of training, monthly variations for example, again to look to cover different facets of each movement. So from a quick recap perspective, we want to choose exercises that look to cover all of our functional primal movement patterns: the squat, lift, pull, press, rotation, smash, gait and locomotion, and moving and carrying load. The squat pattern then, so again looking at just a quick review, this is a knee or quad dominant lower body movement, and so squat pattern exercises that we've kind of covered within this course. On the parallel stance, obviously front squat, back squat, overhead squat will all be completed that way. We could do split stance variations, again front on the rack position, on the back, overhead. You could also do it with the front foot raised, Bulgarian with the rear foot raised. You may also look to do single leg exercises, pistol squats, which are usually done unweighted, and lunges, forwards, backwards, lateral. So this pattern will be important in particular for the snatch and clean catch positions. Also have an application in relation to the second pull, and also for the jerk, dip and drive, and the jerk catch position. The lift pattern, well, this is the hip dominant lower body movement, and lift pattern exercises will include from the parallel stance subgroup, Romanian deadlift or altered Romanian deadlift or deadlift. Again, we'd look to kind of make this more applicable with a snatch or clean by having the correct distance and also adopting a hook grip. Good mornings as well would also come under the lift pattern. So we can also do split stance Romanian deadlift or a single leg Romanian deadlift, or the step and reach, again going forwards or backwards. All of those work well in training this movement pattern. And this pattern in particular is going to be very important for the snatch or clean first pull and second pull, which is why it's critical to be good at performing the lift movement. Now the press pattern is an anterior upper body movement, so press pattern exercises would include pressing upwards, so our strict overhead press or push press, be examples of that movement. Horizontal pressing would be things like bench press, which obviously we haven't really covered under the weightlifting aspect, and downward pressing would include exercises like dips. So this pattern in particular is going to be important for both the jerk and snatch catch positions, which is why we want strong pressing muscles. For the pull movement pattern, this is more of a posterior upper body movement. So pull pattern exercises again would include pulling upwards, horizontal and downwards. So upwards pulling would include our power shrugs or high pulls, horizontal pulling, exercises like bent over rows or standing rows, and pulling downwards, lat pull down, pull-ups, movements like that. So again, this pattern in particular is going to be important for the clean and snatch second pull when we are effectively pulling the bar upwards. Onto the rotation pattern. So this is a transverse torso or hip movement, and rotation pattern exercises will include horizontal rotation, diagonal upwards and diagonal downwards. So horizontal rotation movements may include cable or band rotations. Diagonal upwards would be something like reverse wood chops, and diagonal downwards, standard wood chops. And this pattern will have limited direct carryover to the lifts, but it will train the hips and core for stabilization in the catch. So we don't really tend to see, particularly with two-handed exercises, a lot of rotation occurring, but it is important to train this movement pattern as well. Onto the smash pattern. This is a sagittal torso hip movement and more of a kind of flexion type movement. So this smash pattern exercise would include things like slams, which you could do with a sandbag or slam ball, or hammer slams onto a tire, sandbag forward throws, movements like that. It may also be trained with kind of things like counter extension, stabilization, so exercises like the plank, etc. Although there's no movement, you're still working those smash pattern muscles. And this pattern will help to develop core stabilization in helping to counteract the extension when the load is above the head. So what that means is when you're holding the weight above your head, that load is trying to bend you into extension. So having strong flexors or strong smash pattern muscles will help to counteract that extension force. Gait and locomotion. So this is a body weight only pattern. So you'd look to complement our weightlifting movements with things like walking, running, crawling, swimming. And although this pattern will have limited direct carryover, again, like with all the movement patterns, it'll be good for your functional human performance. So it's worth looking at including these one way or another within your program. And then we have moving and carrying load. So you'd look to just kind of move a weight in different ways over a distance. And this can be trained with exercises like the Turkish get-up, where we're moving from a supine to a standing position, maybe walking with weights overhead, so you carry those, and that would give a good crossover. We're going to be working the same shoulders, arms and upper back movements that we're going to require for the catch position, for the jerk and the snatch. We'll also be looking at using the farmer's walk, so again that'll be good for improving the grip, and also sled exercises, pushing, dragging, etc. And again, this pattern may have limited direct carryover to the lifts, but it will help to develop stabilization strength at the core, hips, ankles and shoulders. So if we analyse the snatch based in relation to these movements, the first pull is going to, and the transition, both the lift pattern. The second pull is moving from the lift into a squat and pull patterns. Pull under is very much a pure pull. And the catch and recovery, both squat and press movements. So key assistant exercises for the snatch will include the back squat, overhead squat, snatch balance, snatch pulls, snatch deadlifts, good mornings, and overhead press and push press. For the clean, all very similar, only main differences are when we get to the catch and recovery, these are going to be pure squat movements since you're catching the bar in the rack position rather than overhead. And again, key assistant exercises going to include the front squat, clean pulls, clean deadlifts, good mornings, and anything really that will help to train any of those movement patterns or key muscles like the hamstrings or low back. Now looking at the jerk movement, the dip and drive, the squat movement, push under, we can argue is the press movement pattern, and the catch and recovery, again, same as for the snatch, are going to be the squat and press, and that is irrespective of whether you are catching it in a split jerk or power jerk or squat jerk position. Key assistant exercises again include the front squat, dip and drives, overhead press and push press, overhead squats or overhead split squat, again depending on whether you're catching it in a parallel or split stance. So key movements that you need to be covered with other exercises, complementary exercises to this snatch, clean and jerk would include from the pull movement, pull-ups and rows. So we're doing an upward pull when we do things like the snatch and the clean, so you need to make sure you're including horizontal pulls, which we do with rows, and pulling downwards, which we do with something like pull-ups. For the press movement, where we're doing a lot of pressing upwards, so again horizontal pressing with the bench press and downward pressing with dips would help to fully cover that movement pattern. For the squat, more single leg emphasis, so we really kind of have a lot of coverage of the parallel stance and the split stance, We don't really do single leg work, we don't really do lunges particularly, or lateral work in the frontal plane. So again, those exercises would be a good complement to our Olympic lifts. On the lift pattern, so again we can argue split stance, single leg lifts would be a nice complement for the parallel stance lifting that we do with the snatch and with the clean. Other supplementary movements, so complementary isolation style exercises may also transfer well to weightlifting or may help to address biomechanical weaknesses. Bicep curls may help with the pulling phases, tricep extensions for any pressing work or overhead work, shoulder and rotator cuff again for both pulling and pressing and stabilization, core and hip stabilization for the catching and stabilizing the core for lifting. Lower back, as we said, is a key weak area, which is why it's so heavily trained with weightlifters. Same thing with hamstring curls and other hamstring exercises to train those as both hip extensors and knee flexors, and also the quadriceps just as part of the squat movement pattern. Looking at programming, so for most beginners to weightlifting, the following recommendations would be most appropriate. Maybe looking at 2 to 3 whole body sessions per week. We'd start off with preparation phase exercises, although a lot of the recommendations that we'll talk through now, we wouldn't actually follow preparation phase recommendations, i.e. kind of doing up to 20 reps of a snatch. So it kind of depends how you're structuring the sessions, but from a general perspective, yeah, we'd start off with preparation phase work to begin with. You want to make sure that you master the slow tempo exercises first, and master the basic positions or exercises before we look to integrate them into the complex movements. So what we mean by that is, key thing with that is try to train each of those phases separately before you start looking at adding the phases in together or start trying to do the whole lifts. Working the range of movement patterns within different sessions across the week or across the phases. Again, so if you're only doing partial range squats because you're just doing the dip and drive for the jerk, then it would be good to work the full range of the squat movement pattern with maybe the front squat at another time during the week. And again, key thing, look to include the hook grip wherever possible, even if not actually doing a weightlifting exercise. You might be doing pull-ups, you might be doing rows. It's good to acclimatize the beginner to that particular grip. So here we see our quick overview of the standing training parameters for different goals. So depending on the exercise and depending on the session, we may well be going for more kind of strength endurance parameters, as you see at the bottom. As we start to become more of a weightlifting-esque program, then you're probably going to find you start to really look more towards the kind of relative strength recommendations, at least within the kind of rep range and time under tension, even if it's not necessarily with the actual. So if we have a look at an example 6-week beginner program, aim of which it would be to practice some of the basic weightlifting exercises as part of a whole body program that covers all of the movement patterns. Prerequisites, we should have mastered all the preparation and screening exercises. We'll show you what we're going to do over a course of 6 weeks. So weeks 1 to 6, we'd be looking at doing 3 sessions a week, session 1A, 2A and 3A. And then week 7, we'd have a rest week with active recovery. So this may be how we look to do the actual weekly breakdown. Session 1A, a little bit more snatch emphasis, 2A, jerk emphasis, and 3A, clean emphasis. So 1A with the snatch emphasis, including the snatch balance, power shrugs from the high hang position, again with the snatch grip, and the snatch grip first pull deadlift. So looking at training those different exercises. We may then complement that with the barbell inclined press, glute ham raise, a high windmill, which you could do with kettlebell, dumbbell, barbell if you wish, and then a kind of rotation complex, looking at downward rotation and horizontal and upward rotation as well. So you're trying to cover all the different kind of rotation movements with a single exercise. Session 2A, our jerk emphasis then, so we may start off with something like a push press with a barbell, drop split squats with dumbbells, so trying to strengthen the catch position, particularly more focused on the lower body. We may then do dips, be it body weight or weighted, for the downward pressing to complement some of the upward pressing stuff that we do a lot of. Overhead walks with a barbell for moving, carrying load, and again to strengthen that shoulder, arm, and thoracic complex. We may do some smash pattern training with hammer slams onto a tire, and a little bit of move and carry and load with some sled pushes as well. And then our clean emphasis for session 3A, we may do some power shrugs with a clean grip from the high hang position, clean grip altered Romanian deadlift to start to learn the transition phase, and then front squats for the catch phase. We may also then do some horizontal rowing with dumbbell single arm rows, some downward pulls with pull-ups, and then following that with half Turkish get-ups to look again to train the anterior and lateral core, just doing the first phase of that. So what we're looking at doing, and you should be able to see that, is more weightlifting emphasized exercises. They're still not the most complex ones that we can go through, obviously. We're still trying to really keep it as some of the more preparation stuff, but we're gradually veering someone from doing some of our more standard gym-based work into more weightlifting, whilst still trying to cover as many of the different human movement patterns as possible. Obviously, over a period of time, we may kind of drop down some of the volume on some of the accessory movements, just so we can start to focus a little bit more on the weightlifting movements and exercises. Looking at specific weightlifting training parameters then, so on the order, the snatch, clean and jerk and many of the subdivision assistant or learning exercises are complex, multi-joint exercises and are supposed to be performed at high velocities. And as such, they should be prioritized at the beginning of a training session, above and before slower strength-based exercises, even what you'd consider now to be big exercises such as squats, presses and rows. The only exception to this may be when an experienced trainer is deliberately placing a heavy load strength exercise, like a front squat, with a suitable weightlifting lift, like a power clean, in order to stimulate the fast twitch fibers with heavier non-fatiguing kind of neural warm-up sets. So what we may do here is, normally we'd say, given the choice between doing a power clean first or a front squat first, you do the power clean first. The exception to that may be that if we really want to stimulate the fast twitch fibers, we may put the front squat first. The key with that is you don't want to fatigue those fast twitch muscles. So we kind of use kind of lower repetition sets, reasonable load but lower repetition, so we don't get that fatigue but we do get that neural firing, and that will give us better performance when we do perform the power clean afterwards. On the repetition range, well, with the snatch, clean and jerk, again, which are complex multi-joint exercises, excessive repetitions may bring about undesirable motor learning and technical changes, i.e. if we do too many reps per set, you may start to change the technique, and then it will be that fatiguing or fatigued technique that you'll start to embed, which is not what you want. So it's going to be better to keep the repetitions per set low, perform more sets. So for example, you could do one set of 30 snatches, or you could do 10 sets of 3 snatches. Both will produce the same total volume, which is 30, but the latter will ensure correct technique for all snatch repetitions. The former is more likely to result in poor technique when you start. So what are optimal repetition ranges? Well, for the snatch or jerk, usually kind of perform those with sets of 1 to 3 reps. For the clean, usually kind of 1 to 4 reps. Now you can do more repetitions, particularly when you're learning, and particularly when the load is lighter, when you're really just practicing the movement, because you're not going to get that fatigue and therefore you're not going to be altering the technique as much. Now for power cleans and power snatches, which are usually lower loads than squats, cleans or squat snatches, you may well be able to do slightly more repetitions per set. Again, optimally 2 to 4 for a power snatch, 3 to 6 for a power clean. For assistant exercises like the overhead squat, reps of 1 to 3 are optimal, again because you're going to get a lot of fatiguing in some of the stabilizing muscles. The delts, maybe the triceps, definitely the kind of upper traps as well, are going to get fatigued very quickly, so you don't want to do many repetitions per set. Front squats, again, we can do, we will get more fatigue in the thoracic stabilizers, so we tend to keep the reps lower than we would do for a back squat, so we might do 4 to 6 reps maximum if we're doing front squats. But each exercise should be evaluated individually for potential stabilizer fatigue, but that's what we're kind of looking at when we're looking at optimal rep ranges. Intensity, well, the average intensity based on a percentage of 1 rep max, even for elite weightlifters, is usually about 75%. So even if you're an elite weightlifter, you're not trying to lift the heaviest weight on every repetition you do. And this means, because they're keeping it at a sub-maximal load, that they can perform more repetitions within a session, even though they are keeping it low reps per set without stressing their body and going into a kind of adrenal fatigue state. We really only see lifting above 90% only represented a very small amount of the time, about 5 to 13% of the total training volume. So if you're looking at an elite lifter and they're only doing 2 or 3 repetitions on the snatch per set, you'd think they'd be lifting heavy loads. They're not necessarily. A lot of the time it is still submaximal. They're really just trying to groove those motor pathways, and if they lift it with their heaviest weights, then the body as a whole just becomes stressed. In relation to tempo and time under tension, well, once learnt, the lifts are or should be performed at fast tempos, and as such, with the low rep ranges, the appropriate time under tension range for weightlifting is usually in that relative strength band of kind of 0 to 20 seconds per set. If we see an X in the 4-digit tempo code, so 10x0 for example, that would designate, again, it's as fast as possible. Unlike hypertrophy training, where the trainer may deliberately add an isometric pause after the eccentric phase, i.e. 3, 2, 1, 0, you don't really tend to see this in the Olympic lifts unless you're really trying to do an isometric phase to overload the stabilizers. So you may see occasionally lifters kind of hold that point between at the end of the first pull before they go into the transition, just to kind of strengthen the hamstrings and low back. But this is more for your kind of non-beginner lifters. With rest periods, so for complex exercises with low reps, longer rest periods between sets will be required in order to allow for both neural recovery and also energy system recovery. So sometimes you kind of think, well, if I'm doing this relative strength training and I'm kind of got my creatine phosphate system back up to where it should be, then I can just crack on. But there is going to be neural fatigue as well, so you do need to take that into account. So beginner lifters may require 90 seconds or so between sets for some basic exercises like the power shrug, but you're going to find that rest period is going to increase even up to 4 to 5 minutes when you're doing full power snatches or power cleans with sets of kind of 1 to 3 reps. Pausing between repetitions within a set, what we refer to as intra-set rest or intra-set pauses, for even 5 to 10 seconds between reps, may help to maintain a higher quality of technique for each repetition, and may also favour the recruitment of our higher threshold motor units, our fast twitch fibers. Looking at sets and volume, so for complex exercises with low reps, we'll be required to perform multiple sets in order to improve that automaticity of the lifts. So beginner lifters may complete 6 to 12 sets of a power snatch or power clean on specific days, or up to that, whilst elite lifters may be completing kind of 32 to 45 sets per day. For basic exercises like the power shrug, altered Romanian deadlift, high pulls, etc., less sets may be more appropriate per session, again depending on the total number of exercises that you're looking at achieving. Always goes the same way. If you do lots of exercises, it's less sets per exercise. If you're only doing 2 or 3 exercises and you're kind of trying to specify or get some real focus on the technique with those 2 or 3 exercises, then you generally need to be doing more sets per exercise. So once the full power snatch, power clean or split of power jerks have been learnt, specific weightlifting sessions may be followed which are focused on the improvement of these key movements. And we'll just show you a few example sessions or what they may look like. So if you're doing the snatch, for example, maybe doing 2 to 3 reps of the power snatch for 6 sets, maybe 3 minutes between sets. We may then also complement that with snatch pulls, so only performing the kind of earlier phases. Again, maybe 4 sets, 2 to 4 reps per set on that. And then complementing that with something like back squats, and even kind of glute ham raises. And again, the focus you can see with the volume of sets is much more on the weightlifting lifts, and then we're using some of the assistant exercises with lower sets just to complement those. You may do the same thing for the clean, more sets, so 6 sets, 3 or 4 reps for the power clean, and then we may also complement that with clean pulls from the floor, and then again front squats, good mornings, exercises like that to train some of the muscles specifically involved in the clean. For the jerk, maybe doing 2 to 3 repetitions per set for the split jerk, again 6 sets, and we'd look to alternate sides either with each repetition or with each set. And what we mean by that is that you're not always leading with the same leg. So you may well prefer to do a split jerk with your left foot forward. It's important also to train with the right foot forward as well. Otherwise you may well get bilateral strength differences and just a little bit of left to right imbalance. We may complement that with some heavy dip and drives, some extra heavy rack holds. So what we would do here is get the bar into a rack position, really load it up with a lot of weight, just effectively unrack it. So we'd use these kind of safety bars so it's nice and secure. So just lift it up a couple of inches so you're in a standing position and hold that for 10 to 20 seconds. It should be much more weight than you could clean or even do a push press with, but we're just getting used to having a very heavy weight in that rack position. And we may also do some kind of arm and shoulder focus based work where we may do some partial range of movement overhead lockouts. So you may do this again, setting the bar up just slightly kind of below where it would be for a full kind of recovery position in that standing position, and you're just going to work that last little bit just to take it up to kind of full lockout. Again, just trying to strengthen some of those stabilizer muscles and accessory muscles used within that particular movement pattern. Now, not that we would recommend you kind of do this yourself, but just to give you an example of what some weightlifters may perform. This is an example of what we call a kind of Bulgarian methodology. So they may be doing 2 sessions per day. Session 1, you look at covering about 38 sets, which we perform on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. Starting off in the morning, doing back squats, break and then snatch, break, clean and jerk, break, snatch again, break, and then front squat. Session 2, again we do kind of 32 sets, performing something very kind of similar, and then you may do kind of 2 other sessions performed on a Wednesday and a Saturday. So we kind of do 2 sessions a day, Monday, Tuesday, down to kind of 1 session on a Wednesday, 2 sessions again Thursday, Friday, back to 1 session again on a Saturday. That is not for your basic lifters and amateur lifters. So we are pretty much dedicating our whole day to training. And again, not all of those sets, or those sets aren't going to be 7 sets to failure on every set. We're really looking at trying to get a reasonable volume of training in, but then hardly any of those sets are actually going to be to complete fatigue, if any of those sets to complete fatigue. But that just gives you an idea of what some elite lifters may do. Again, not all elite weightlifters will follow that kind of program as well, but that will give you an idea of what some weightlifters may do in relation to a volume as opposed to more amateur or beginner lifters. So you should complete the review questions for this module to ensure you met the learning outcomes, and then move on to the next module.